This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. The notion behind a wanted poster makes a lot of sense. A dangerous criminal is on the loose, and if you're a sheriff in a Wild West movie or an FBI agent in a thriller, getting the public involved could be your best bet for catching that bank robber or killer on the lam. But in Missouri, that idea gets a twist that excludes the public eye, a system of wanteds used by police departments to apprehend suspects, a system that's attracted criticism for years and sometimes put police on a kind of blind chase that leads to people being arrested without knowing why. That's what happened to Kaitlyn Killgo. It began last year when she was arrested and detained for hours over a crime she says she had no awareness of. Killgo is now suing that officer and others. And joining me now to talk about this case, I'm joined by Kaitlyn Killgo. Kaitlyn, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Elaine.
And also here to talk about Missouri's wanted system and why it continues to draw legal scrutiny, we're joined by Maureen Hanlon, managing attorney with the St. Louis civil rights law firm Arch City Defenders. Maureen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So Kaitlyn, you're an activist and a community organizer, and you were arrested in April of last year during an anti-war protest on the campus of Washington University. That set off a chain of events that's now led to this lawsuit, and Maureen here is representing you in that litigation. After that arrest, Kaitlyn, in April 2024, you had another encounter with police during another protest. What made you realize that something unusual was happening?
The encounter you're referring to, we were outside the county jail, kind of a vigil, and several people just having a conversation, standing in public, and my last name was shouted out by people I didn't immediately recognize in an unmarked car. So yeah, that was the first clue, and that something like it's not a normal thing for the majority of people that aren't in the public eye to have people they don't know their name.
Mm-hmm. What was your reaction at that time? And you have a very distinct last name, so I don't think that there's too much of a chance that you would have mistaken it for something else.
Yeah, I definitely didn't, and it was kind of funny because the people around me that we were in, conversation with, also didn't know my last name, and so were confused. Like, who are they? No one knew who they were talking to except for me. But I've never been in that circumstance before, and so I wasn't prepared to respond to a stranger calling out my name, my last name a few times, and then my first name. So it caught me off guard.
Mm-hmm. And were you at all thinking, did you have any inkling that it was connected to that WashU campus protest where you'd been arrested?
Not immediately. It was... the whole exchange happened in less than 60 seconds because he called my last name 2 or 3 times and then my first name. And then there was a pause, and some of the people that were standing next to me were like, "Oh, Kate, I think he's talking to you." And I was like, "Yeah, I think he is, but I don't know him. I'm not talking to someone I don't know."
Right.
And then after that, quieter exchange where they couldn't, they were probably 30, 40 yards away, they said, "We want our helmet back," and then drove off immediately, without waiting for a response. And so I didn't know what they were talking about, but that was definitely my name.
Yeah.
So it took me a little while to put it together. It was afterwards, I was just holding the image of the guy who was in the passenger seat in my mind, his face, and I was like, I know him. Where do I know him from? And it was probably the next day when I was talking to a few other people about the exchange that I placed where I knew him from, and it was a police officer that I had recognized from the county jail the night that we had been arrested. Me and over 100 people had been arrested and were being held in the county jail, and I recognized him, and for trying to talk to me and things like that.
Then, some months after, over Labor Day weekend last year, Kaitlyn, you were arrested again, and this time it was in Eureka, which is about 30 minutes from St. Louis. What happened there?
I was with a friend and on my way to meet a few other friends. We had exited one of the main exits that leads to Eureka to go out to a nature reserve. It was Labor Day weekend, and so we, like many others, were planning on enjoying the outdoors. And it was, as I was pulling off the highway, I noticed a police car sitting, often on holiday weekends especially, they'll be out shooting radar and looking for, whatever. But then he pulled out behind me but kept distance and went through the first light and then pulled up to the second light, and as it turned red and I stopped, and the car kept back 3 or 4 car lengths, leaving a significant amount of space and an unusual amount of space between me. And so that's when, my heart started pounding and I'm like, okay, what's going on? And the light turns green and I continue on, and he follows me for a little bit more and turns his lights on, pulls me over. So yeah, that's when the real anxiety kicked in, because I'm like, okay, I wasn't speeding. Like, we were at a red light. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't doing this. I'm racking my brain. I'm like, what on earth could it possibly be? And, I realized my license plate, although, it's fine, is mounted in the window. And so I think it just triggered his, eye, and he decided to run my plate, and he was sitting back and waiting. And so he comes up and he was like, yeah, your license plate is mounted in the window. And I'm like, yes, it is. And I'm like, am I being detained? And he was like, well, there's a wanted on your license plate number, and that comes back from Washington University. Do you know anything about that? And I was like, no, I definitely don't. And sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Yeah.
So, Maureen Hanlon, as an attorney with Arch City Defenders, it's at this point that you become involved. What is it that went first through your mind, hearing the details of what Kaitlyn experienced?
So, sort of the end of that encounter is that Kaitlyn is taken into custody, so arrested, which means deprived of her liberty, put in a jail, forced to wait in the jail. I get in contact with Kate afterwards because we've actually been challenging Wanted as a system for over a decade at this point. Me and Kaitlyn end up speaking with the police officers, and they confirm the police officers that issued this Wanted. And what they confirm is true of most of my other clients that have been in this situation, which is that they want to interview or get information from someone. They don't have a warrant. They have not been to a judge. They maybe sort of allege or make statements about how they have probable cause to believe that there's a crime, but they don't, really. And that they are seeking to use the threat of an arrest to get that person to come in and be interrogated. Mm-hmm. And Kaitlyn, like many people, chose to exercise her Fifth Amendment right, which is in the United States Constitution, to not give testimony against herself and just say, I don't want to talk. And what happened there is that the officers then threatened her with future arrest at any point by any officer at any moment's notice in a way that is completely insulated from the public eye. So she would have no way to know if such a wanted was issued against her. Essentially in retaliation for her saying, I don't want to come in front. Yeah, I don't want to talk.
Well, and I don't have to. I didn't have anything to say. The officer that arrested me that day, he couldn't tell me why Eureka wanted to talk to me. He couldn't tell me what, alleged crime he thought I had been a part of. And neither could I.
Mm-hmm. And so what happened to Kaitlyn, I think, is what happens to many other people, which is where, I have no knowledge of whether or not a crime was committed here. I know that Kaitlyn didn't commit the crime. And what can happen with something like a wanted, which is sort of extrajudicial, by which I mean there isn't a judge involved. There isn't really much legal process involved. It's just a police officer sort of giving out a notice to other police officers to pick someone up and arrest them based on like a hunch or an idea. And that idea can be wrong.
Right.
Or presence at a protest, a political protest.
Right.
And that idea, I mean, the Eureka police officer, when you were arrested and then when you were taken into detainment, I mean, was there ever any mention of a helmet? Mm-mm. So you had no details?
I didn't hear about the helmet again until after I had retained Arch City and Maureen, and when I was in her office and we had, finally gotten a chance to sit down and call the detective back, and have that conversation. And it wasn't until he mentioned the police property and the helmet on the phone that it even triggered the memory of being outside the jail that day. I mean, that memory definitely stuck in my mind. I hadn't forgotten it, but that I didn't connect the dots that incident was related to my arrest in Eureka. And that's when I connected all 3 points from the April protest as well.
Maureen, comparatively, how does a normal arrest play out, one that occurs without the use of these Missouri wanteds?
Sure. So there's 2 ways officers generally arrest people. The first is that they work up a case, they investigate a case, they have reason to believe that someone committed a crime. They go to a prosecutor who then goes to a judge. And so you have both a prosecutor and a judge taking a second look at it, and they get an arrest warrant signed. And then that person is taken into custody by the police based on this arrest warrant. And so there's all sorts of checks in that process. I mean, that process is not that rigorous, right? Like, I always have concerns about some pieces of that process, but there are multiple people other than just a single officer involved being like, okay, do you have any evidence that this person committed a crime? Mm-hmm. The second way is that there are times where, under exigent circumstances, by which I mean like an emergency, right? Like, God forbid, a school shooting or some sort of like emergency where an officer can say, I know that person committed a crime, I'm watching them do it, or I'm somehow going to intervene and there's some kind of emergency going on, I'm going to go arrest them without a warrant. And then an officer has a certain amount of time to then go to a judge and get a warrant. Mm-hmm. And so in either circumstance, there's these extra checks on it. So we had prior litigation about this issue because what happens with wanteds, by comparison, is this situation could not have been less urgent. Like, first of all, you're talking, as far as we know about the alleged crime, it's 5 months later. It is an alleged theft of like a single piece of property. It's just been sitting around, right? So there's no emergency happening. And a wanted was issued, which means it goes out on the system called Regis, which means any officer can access that system and go pick someone up. Mm-hmm. And what to me is scary about wanteds in comparison to warrants is that there could be a wanted issued for any of the 3 of us in this room. And we would have no way of knowing about it. We would have no way to quash it. We would have no way of getting more information. And any citizen could be dragged from their car and taken to a jail. And in this case, taken to a jail at the behest of a campus security department.
Yes.
And WashU has taken the position in many other cases that these are not even law enforcement officers.
This is a great spot for us to take a quick break, but we will come back shortly to continue this conversation. And when we return, we'll learn what happened when attorney Maureen Hanlon traced that wanted for Kaitlyn Killgo back to its source and how what she discovered changed the entire case. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. Let's return to our conversation about a system that allows police in Missouri to arrest people without a warrant. I'm here with Kaitlyn Killgo. She's a St. Louis resident and activist who is suing multiple police officers over her arrest last year. Also with me is attorney Maureen Hanlon. She's representing Kaitlyn Killgo in that lawsuit. Maureen, we were talking about wanteds, the situation around that. We also talked a little bit, you had brought up Washington University, and there's a pivotal moment in this case and the development of it, and it came almost exactly 1 year ago after you began working on the case. You and Kaitlyn called a detective at Washington University. What happened in that call?
Sure. So one aspect of the wanted system, like I said, is the fact that there is no publicly available information about if a wanted's been issued, who it's issued against, what the basis of it is. And so for someone like Kate, that can be terrifying because you've already undergone a situation where you've been, yanked out of your car, held, you don't know why, you don't know. And so as an advocate for my client, I wanted to figure out how can we stop this from happening again? And so we call the person that this is why it's so complicated. We called the detective that the Eureka police had told us had issued the wanted. Again, not like a database I could look up like a warrant. We speak to that detective, and that detective says that their goal is to get Kate to come in to give information about a crime, an alleged theft of a helmet that Kate is completely uninvolved in, knows nothing about. And, I say that my client doesn't want to talk, has a constitutional right to not speak to the officers, wants to exercise that right. And in this situation, making it even particularly more complicated, they wanted Kate to come into the undergraduate campus of Washington University. And the university had issued a no trespassing order against Kate and every other protester, even some, I think, current students involved in that pro-Palestinian protest. And so, for just a smattering of reasons, including the most foundational one, which is like, you don't have to, I said, my client doesn't want to come in, but like, we wish you luck in your investigation. And that's where the officer, the detective, threatened to put out another wanted, which would subject my client to another random arrest at some point with the goal of getting her into a room to interrogate her. Mm-hmm. And so, obviously, Kate can talk about how scary that is for her just as a person, but this is where I think me and other civil rights constitutional lawyers have concerns about this. Because if you have a right not to talk to the police, exercising a right should not by definition make you subject to an arrest. So if I say, oh, you have the right to say whatever you want, and then you say something, and I'm like, well, now you get arrested for saying that, that's no longer a right. If I say you have a right, if you truly have a right in this country that you don't have to be interrogated by police, like if you get hauled into an interrogation room, you don't have to say something, then you shouldn't then be threatened with consequences for exercising that right. And that is, the testimony from many police officers over many cases that I've had is that wanteds are generally used as a tool to investigate. And that's putting the cart before the horse. If you're going to arrest someone, why don't you figure out if they did the crime before you arrest them rather than use an arrest as a way to investigate.
Mm-hmm. Or intimidate.
Mm-hmm. What was your reaction, Kaitlyn, to this call? And as I understand, it was also the first time that you had confirmation that the WashU police were accusing you of stealing a helmet. But what was that like?
Definitely nerve-wracking because, it's a traumatic experience being arrested, being, touched by someone against your will in multiple ways. Having it's uncomfortable to have your hands behind your back in handcuffs. And that's just where it starts. It's an incredibly traumatic experience. So the fact that I have pictures of all the bruises that were left on me by WashU PD and other officers acting under their jurisdiction, if you want to call it that, I think cops and skeptics would say, oh, well, if you have nothing to hide, why not just go in and talk? And I'm like, yes, exercising my constitutional right should be enough for them to not be suspicious. But, if you need more reasons, they abused me. In my mind, I was kidnapped. Like, they never charged me with anything. They still have not been able to prove I committed any crime by just being there to protest against a genocide and an institutional investment in that genocide. Like, I mean, that's really why they're coming, why they want to like put charges on people, but they can't because we weren't doing anything wrong, and yeah, I would just say, like, I have multiple reasons why I wouldn't want to go into questioning. It's an abusive system, and I tend to want to stay away from people that harm me.
Mm-hmm. So what has it been like to live in this kind of limbo, in uncertainty about whether your name remains on this wanteds list or could be put there again?
Well, as you pointed out earlier, I am a community organizer. I'm very involved with friends, neighbors, and community members. It's that, the same reason I went to the protest that day is the same reason I do everything I do. Like, I believe that, nothing belongs to me. We belong to the earth. And so I try to share everything I have, and that includes my car and my vehicle. I give people rides often. I have several friends that don't have their own vehicles or don't have driver's licenses that I give rides to. I use that privilege that I have to share with the work that I do and connecting people. And I can't let anyone borrow my car because my license plate, I don't want to subject them to trauma, like just getting pulled over because I did them a favor. It's scary even giving people rides because, like, what if that person I'm taking, like, doesn't have a driver's license and I get pulled over and they decide to arrest me again and they can't drive my car, away from me, then my car gets impounded. What, then I miss work? What if my phone's dead and I'm not able to call a lawyer like I was in Eureka that day? Like, there's so many other things, and that's just where it starts. Like, so many people are affected by these wanteds because, like, that's, maybe on the end of the best case scenario spectrum what happened to me, and it was still traumatic. But you look at the other end of it, and you get picked up on a wanted in St. Louis, and you're taken to the CJC, one of the deadliest jails in America. Like, you may never see your family again, or they may never see you again.
Maureen, could any police officer be asked to execute a wanted, at any time? So anywhere Kaitlyn goes, could this potentially be waiting for her?
Well, they shouldn't. So there was an Eighth Circuit decision, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is, the appellate court issued a decision in a prior case of our Furlow v. Belmar, which talked about how wanteds are not per se unconstitutional, but they are ripe for constitutional abuse. And so in that decision, it said very clearly that executing a wanted, so arresting someone on a wanted, if it doesn't fit into an existing exception to a warrant requirement, like there is not some sort of exigency, you are part of some sort of investigative team going after someone, some sort of clear emergency exigency, then it is unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. Now, Elaine, I am not in this position, but were I an attorney for a city, were I an attorney for WashU, were I an attorney for the county, I would be telling my police department, look, you got to stop picking people up on these things. And I think there are some departments who have tried to put in restrictions or rules around how their officers engage with this system. Now, I don't know that those rules are followed. And I would say, for example, in this case, they were clearly not followed, right? So we believe this case is a clear violation of how these things are supposed to work. So a short answer to your question, Lane, is if police officers were following sort of the precedent as to how these should be used, Kaitlyn's arrest never should have happened.
Mm-hmm. Now, 2 years ago, we heard from Tim Reinhart. He had an experience remarkably similar to Kaitlyn, what you've been through. And Tim was arrested because police had issued a wanted, and he spent 24 hours in jail without knowing why.
Through the whole process, I was like, do I have a brain tumor? Did something happen to the point where I did something that I just don't recall? And there's no information given. So you're in your own head, with nothing to pass time. Magazine, cell phone, watch. It's frustrating, It's a weird, because you're just stewing all night, not knowing. Everybody else that was in there knew why they were there, whether it was drunk driving, whether it was, failure to pay tickets. There was a lot of people, everyone else knew why they were there. I was just, I don't know.
And that was Tim Reinhart. We interviewed him in 2023 about his lawsuit against the Chesterfield Police Department. Reinhart spent 24 hours in jail after a store clerk mistakenly identified him to police as a shoplifter. This week, Reinhart's attorney told us that his lawsuit has ended in a settlement. Kaitlyn, your case is likely to take a couple years to reach some resolution. How do you feel about taking that on? What makes this case worth pursuing for you?
I've been taken care of in my life, and I've been harmed in my life, and I care deeply about people, and I care about preventing harm. And I heard a story about a woman who's also picked up on a wanted in 2010 for a crime she had nothing to do with, and ultimately charges were dropped. But she spent more than 3 months in prison and gave birth to her daughter prematurely, 2.5 pounds in jail. And I think about stories like that really should be told. And so when I don't enjoy being a public figure. This is very nerve-wracking to be on the radio even. But when I think about that, and I think about that fear, I think about how much more other people are suffering, and that I can use, this case and this, clear abuse of the system to hopefully prevent abuse for others. And so, even though this to me was to intimidate me and others and try to discourage us from speaking up and using our voice, really the only things that we have are our own voice, our bodies, and our choices, and that's what I'm doing. I'm using that, to help, and I won't allow any kind of intimidation to silence me, no matter how scary it is and how traumatic it could be.
Kaitlyn Killgo is a St. Louis resident who is suing the police departments of Washington University and the city of Eureka. Maureen Hanlon is managing attorney with the St. Louis civil rights law firm, Arch City Defenders. Maureen and Kaitlyn, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.